Owens Corning has been gracious enough to kind of share their process of how they're going about collecting scan data, how they're documenting the process and making sure that it's clear to all the parties involved. And then they have kind of been connected to us through the CURT, Construction Users Roundtable. From the owner side of things, one of the initiatives that they have going on is specific to how you go about standardizing and thinking about how you can put the best kind of prescription forward of how you want to collect this information. And that brings us to Dustin Williams, FlywheelAEC, heavy on the scan side of things. And he's been working with Josh DeStefano on the laser scanning side, making sure that there's standardization. So Josh won't be here on the DPR side of things, but will be here on the, I'm drawing a blank, Josh, if you can help me out.
USIBD.
Yes, thank you. All I could think was
Institute of Building Documentation.
DBIO, and I was like, why am I drawing a blank here? Thank you.
Too many acronyms.
So everyone here is going to be talking a little bit about how they go about documenting what is required so that we can make sure that we're getting the best deliverable. So, and I'm going to let Dustin share his Miro board, which is kind of outlining the process that we've gone through so far.
Ryan, would you mind giving just a super quick intro on the CURT side of things and what, before we got together, what you guys were working towards?
Yeah, so the overall CURT initiative in our group is really to help owners kind of identify, assess, implement, and measure technology for capital projects, which is a gigantic chunk to bite off. And so we thought as a group that if we can narrow that down to a specific use case, in this case, reality capture, and just sort of take an agile approach to it and say, well, let's just try to process this on reality capture technology, route it through our little system, see if we can come up with a white paper and see what happens as an indicator for how we process future technologies. Then we'll kind of learn that way as opposed to taking a top-down approach and trying to invent the whole massive thing at once. So we're yeah, thankful to all you guys who jumped in to help and eager to see what comes of this, both for the reality capture side and for future technology implementation.
Great, thanks. And so we were working kind of tangentially. You know, we've been discussing for over a year now, lots of different aspects of just, you know, trying to get to instead of reinventing the wheel every time, just identifying how we can get to what type of reality capture best fits certain projects, and how we might define or help others get to those answers more quickly and just move quicker. So that's what we've been talking about for a while. These are some of the previous graphics that we've created, but more recently we've been working with CURT and graciously, as Bree pointed out, Owens Corning has been discussing with us in a few meetings. We're in the middle of these discussions, so there's a lot to talk about, I think, today. But we've been talking about their process and some of the things like lessons learned and things like that. And if you're seeing this CDX scenario workflow we've started filling out, it's pretty common across all the CDX initiatives to try to document pain points and different connections to different personas. So just to run through that real quick, these are stakeholders. In this case, we've got laser scanning consultants and the owner. So those are the two you'll see. It's pretty simple in this one. System of record here on the left-hand side is also, that's in this case, so far we've only identified that SIN2 is the system of record for Owens Corning, and then the documents of record, we're referring to those as. Owens was also gracious enough to share all these requirements, and we can go into these in more detail, but basically a specification for what they expect from their reality capture services consultant to provide and how they provide it. And I think that Bree also mentioned earlier, which I thought was exactly what I was thinking, just the fact that they have this document means that they're probably on the leading edge. And we really want to help others identify what they need to in their organizations so they can create documents like this, referencing things like the USIBD. So we're not reinventing those wheels either. And as those develop, we can just be tagging those for those updates, whether it's point density, geolocation, things like that, which are all topics we'd like to talk about today. And then is Mike here or George? Did you want to just kind of go over real quickly just what we talked about initially as it relates to this graphic?
Yeah, Mike's on. I think he's audio only, so he'll be in a better position to do that than I am.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you just a brief overview of how we're approaching this. Is that you know, from this drawing here, you know, we start a project and we're taking our standard for the scanning, and you know what, one of the pain points we had was that, you know, in the past we used to have to send people all over the world to do scans. We've now kind of boiled it down into saying, well, we can use a local scanning agent, and as long as they provide the information by our specification, then we can take that information. We have settled into Institue as a site for us to upload the files and upload the point clouds into, using that local reference. And then we make that available to our engineering partners, which are a contracted service, and they can use those models that are up in Institue for doing their work to validate models and fit to the space claims. And you know, the value that we're seeing in the Institue is the value of it generating the surface models, which make it easier for us to handle the data and easier for us to work within it, versus having large point clouds. You know, in the past, we used to have to take the point clouds and then pay an engineering firm to kind of engineer a model in the point cloud space. And, you know, this seems to have really helped us reduce that amount of work that's involved there. And then we have a common place. It's a commonly accessible, a ubiquitous type environment where people can get to it just by us allowing them into the space, and everybody's working with the same models and the same data. And our plans right now, we don't know long term if we're going to leave the documents or the files in the Institue site, whether we're going to pull them down at this point. But we are continuing to have some discussions around that on our long-term strategy of whether we leave them up there or not. We have a unique situation in that a lot of times we do a project in a facility and we might not be back in the facility for 10 years. And, you know, to maintain the data for 10 years on the surface doesn't sound like a good idea, but we're kind of looking at it, well, if I pull it down and I keep it somewhere else, what's the cost structure of doing so? And, you know, we may actually determine that, yeah, leaving it up there is the right thing to do for us from a cost structure. I'll stop there and see if that answers any questions or generates any questions.
I would like to just touch on a couple of things, like when we're talking about a lot of this, and Mike just touched on most of these. When we're trying to identify what tool is right for that job, we've identified these different features, which would be, so the ease of capture, the frequency of capture, the output accessibility, output reliability, and then the interoperability of that data. And I think Mike definitely touched on a few of those things. It was very early on that we were discussing, you know, why do you use this tool? And he just touched on the fact that, you know, they don't need to maintain as-built records as of now, because the frequency that they're updating things a decade or more on average. So just something to keep in mind as we talk about some of the pain points and benefits we can.
I think this goes back to what CURT's mission here is, like, how do you identify the right technology and that, you know, what its use case is. So always thinking the perspective of, like, there's so many forms of reality capture. It's not about like picking one and sticking with it. It's picking the one that works for the solution you need.
Right. Just trying to get the best ROI that we can. So some of the things we talked about, I guess, what were some other main points here? I think Mike already touched on in the past what they did. It was a more painful process, which a lot of laser scan. If you're talking about laser scanning, file sizes are always an issue, and especially in older workflows. Sending around, you know, hard drives through the mail or FedEx, and that those pain points are being reduced by things like Institue, where we're hosting and sharing and visualizing, and platforms like that. I guess I'm curious if Institue wanted to comment on the value proposition you guys have for how you, well, I would rather you speak to it, but if there's like an advanced meshing opportunity, there's obviously the sharing and the viewing opportunity. And then also, I believe there is a model intake. Instead of maybe bringing your three-dimensional data into a model, you're bringing the model into Institue. Maybe Dominique could speak to that.
Yeah, thanks for raising that. Yeah, when we started Institue, you know, after spending years with Autodesk Recap, I found that those stressful laser scan data was used only by very few people, in fact. So we made a study at Autodesk at some point, you know, for one survey, for one scan survey, so one surveyor doing the job, how many people would use the data in AutoCAD or Revit, something like that. We found that there will be about 20 to 40 people using the point cloud, okay, at some point. And one of the good reasons why there is so few people using the data is because, yeah, given the size of the data, it's very difficult to share, to handle. You have to send a physical hard disk, you know, or a USB stick. So you lose control of who is using what. This is creating silos within companies and with your contractors. So that was the number one issue we had to address. Okay, how can you make this point cloud data something that will become cloud compatible? In fact, the point cloud was the last data type that was not yet point cloud ready. Okay, everything else is completely ready for the cloud, like BIM models, documents, something like that, but point cloud was not yet. And so, but this was issue number one. Issue number two, how can I make this data easier to view and interpret? Okay, you know, the difficulty of using point cloud is that you see through the dots, and if you try to make a simple measurement, you know, even in Revit, you may pick the wrong points, okay, because you are not looking at surfaces, you are looking at, you know, a set of dots in space. So this is why this mesh technology that I found in the lab was really interesting, because not only it will make the data much lighter, like 10 to 20 times smaller in size than a point cloud, without losing any accuracy or density. So there is no compromise on accuracy or density. But also the measure-based viewing and streaming makes it much easier to view and interpret. And when I look at now how many people use Institue in a given for a given customer, for some of the customers we're talking about hundreds. We have hundreds of users now accessing the data because it's much easier to view, interpret, and access, okay, through a simple WebGL viewer. So this is, I would say, this is a new type of reality data that we have come up with that really addresses these two pain points, which is how can I make this data type fully cloud compatible, and how can I make it much easier to view and interpret by non-experts? So I don't know if I'm answering your question, Dustin, but this is a kind of this was the initial value proposition we had for this platform.
Sure. So it's it's taking the point cloud data and turning into mesh, and I think a lot of people here are aware like that's a much lighter weight thing, but sometimes meshes don't turn out the way people want either. There's the data loss potentially, depending if it's
No, I have to be very specific on this one. The technology behind Institue will not lose any point cloud density of accuracy, and there is a pattern on that. So we can retrieve back the source point cloud from the mesh with its initial grid repartition, mesh density, on accuracy. So this is the beauty of it, so that you can use this mesh for viewing in a web browser, but at the end of the day, people will need to have an RCP file in Revit to do their work, okay? And this RCP file cannot be different from the source point cloud. So we can go back from the mesh to the source point cloud and retrieve your exact point cloud. And this is the beauty of it. It's not about simplifying your point cloud with a mesh. The mesh that we do produce will keep the resolution and density of your point cloud, and we can go back to the same data set.
And not all solutions are the same. So some others do simplify it. I wasn't speaking about Institue in particular, but yes, that's a good distinction.
That was an important topic to gain the trust from surveyors at the beginning with Institue, and we produce a white paper about that. Is that okay? You can trust the meshing technology because at some point you can go back to your source point cloud from the mesh, and if you compare this reconstructed point cloud to the source point cloud using like a cloud compare, for example, you will not notice any difference. And that was something we had to do at the beginning. Now people trust us. But yeah, this is still a valid point on, we need to continue showing what we can do.
Right, and with no data loss, then we're kind of talking about point cloud density, and something that a lot of people this isn't just about point clouds either. If anybody has any comments on other types of data, but this is the Owens Corning kind of use case that we've been talking about, and mostly what we've been talking about is that laser scanning data. And when we're talking about that, they've started referencing their document of record, right? So you can see some of the ways they classify these things, accuracy, georeferencing, things like that. And I think this is probably where Josh can speak to a lot of things as far as standards go. This isn't necessarily referencing a standard, but it's pretty in line with a typical standard. Actually, there is the LOA in here.
Yeah,
the very first one.
I think that stemmed from a conversation I had recently with Nathan, and it's kind of how I got invited to the call in the first place. And to give folks a little bit of background on the standards that we're specifically talking about, the U.S. Institute of Building Documentation developed a level of accuracy, or LOA, standard a number of years ago. It's on its third version. And the way that I like to describe it is that it talks about level of accuracy for both your measured point cloud, or your measured accuracy, and your represented accuracy, which typically involves what we're talking about here, a post-scan model. Typically, a BIM 3D representation, basically. But the way that I like to describe it is it takes accuracy and divides it into tiers, so that you can have a common nomenclature around where what accuracy you're specifying. So in the same way that LOD has a couple different tiers, and there's sort of definitions within each one. And when someone says, I want a level 300, I want a level 350 model, we to some degree have come to a consensus on that. And so that's a lot of what we're trying to do with the LOA. And there's just not a lot of awareness around it. So we are seeing, some folks that are creating their standards, getting aware that exists. And you can see the example here. It's talking about LOA 40. So in the case of LOA, they're in increments of 10. I assume that's probably not to be confused with the 3-digit versions of the LOD. And there's also 5 levels. And again, there's measured accuracy, and then there's represented accuracy. And the tricky thing to understand this is, you can't have something that is represented be a tighter accuracy than something that's measured. So typically you're going to go up in LOA or stay about the same. So in the sense of like your point cloud might be LOA 30 or LOA 40, your model in the sense that your straightening pipes and your straightening walls might be a little less accurate from the real deal kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that this definitely comes into play. Coming from the civil side, I guess the thing that comes to mind is when you're representing a measurement down to how many decimal places or how many significant figures. If you have 4 decimal places on a laser scan that is, plus or minus, tenth of a foot, you're kind of misrepresenting that. But you have to know what that laser scan is ultimately. So when it gets delivered, you can adjust your measurements based off of how the person who scanned it and processed it determine the accuracy of it. And there's a couple of different types of accuracy, but I think we'll stay out of the relative versus global accuracy for now.
Yeah, and I think this is more toward relative accuracy in terms of representing the real thing, not so much in terms of like coordinates for, global type of accuracy. But yeah, it does have to do with, your registration and everything. There's also some recommendations, I believe, on how to validate that information and go through that process. But yeah, it's really the idea of being able to say, hey, we want an accuracy of LOA 30, or we want an accuracy of LOA 40, and trying to create some standards around what that means.
Yeah, I think when the LOA, it's really more it's one of those very subjective things where it's like, what are you trying to capture? So for instance, if you're trying to capture if you're doing a building, if you're scanning the exterior of a building, and you need to understand is it brick versus CMU? And I just threw it as a quick stream of thought, right? In order to understand, the seam, like the thickness between mortar joints and all of that, if it's, a highly detailed model, you're going to want to scan it at a certain resolution and probably scan in color. If you're trying to contextualize the building itself, you're probably better off just using a UAV, like it just, and tie it to control.
Yeah, you can sort of go both ways, right? You can say, well, I'm choosing this particular type of hardware, so I'm going to be restricted to certain levels of accuracy. Or you can say, well, I want this level of accuracy, so I have this choice for hardware. And so I think that's a big understanding to sort of like connect those two pieces. I really like what you guys did in terms of the criteria there. It's very simple. It's very easy to understand. Where my mind goes with that is use cases and, understanding which one of those priorities sort of falls within the use case. Sounds like in this particular case, we're talking specifically as-built. And are we talking as-built existing conditions, or are we talking about as-built as we go construction capture?
For Mike, based on our conversations, it's mostly like an industrial existing space that will be updated, and you need to know what's there to be able to make that design.
So if we
Yeah,
go
that's
back
the
up
intent.
Radar charts, this is like scan for design, scan to construct.
Yeah, and the way we've taken a broader approach although we've looked at criteria, accuracy, I love the way that you guys put it. What we started with was use case. And what we were trying to do was get folks to stop thinking about the technology first and start thinking about what are you actually trying to do? And so go from a use case, and we have set sort of categories. One of those would be existing conditions. And then because you're using reality capture for that specific use case, there could be several objectives that you want to get out of that, right? So we go from use case to an objective. An example might be just like this: we're validating the existing conditions, documenting the existing conditions. You can go even further into doing some quality control, shameless plug for Rhythm, and you know, more into that side of understanding really what's there, beam deflection, all that kind of good stuff. So we start with the use case, go into objectives, and then try to understand from there, based on the objective, and in some ways based on some of the stuff that you're talking about, but layer on that objective, what technology are we going to use? And then that way we can walk the team through, okay, this job has existing conditions. Are we verifying? Are we capturing? Are we what are we doing? Are we addressing those existing conditions? And then what's our objective by doing that? And then match up the right technology to be able to execute that in the way that, you know, aligns with the requirements.
I think with some of the things I've seen recently, and I'd love for others to jump in and see what they're seeing, but when people are approaching us, it's definitely, we're taking that step back. They're thinking they want a particular type of technology or service, and then once we find out what it is that they want, we're taking a step back and identifying that, so we could maybe possibly use a different technology that has a better ROI. There's a lot going on in the industry now. It's not a matter of just using a drone for photogrammetry or a high-end laser scanner. So there's a lot in between and below, for sure.
Yeah, that's the exact challenge we were trying to solve, even internally at DPR, was people will ask for laser scanning. And it's like, okay, I got a laser scanner. What are you trying to do, right? And so it was trying to flip that on its head to start with, you know, what you actually want to do with it. And I'm trying to pull up our sort of chart that we developed. We sort of developed a, in a sense, a execution plan document, and I can share with you guys what I was just talking about, of sort of going from use cases to objectives kind of thing.
I think it comes down to one other thing that's really important, is to know who the subcontractors or who's involved in the parties, because it can be very aspirational to capture all of this data. But if the person consuming it doesn't have the ability to model to that level of detail anyway, it doesn't matter. You know, you've just burned, you know, the goal of construction is all about reducing profit erosion in many ways, right? So if you end up spending money on something that someone is unable to execute on, you shouldn't do it. Like, it sounds great and it's wonderful, but I think it's, if you have the ability to kind of qualify who's doing what, that matters a lot, just because you don't want it, you know, you could capture data at a super high res level and it doesn't matter.
But
Like,
see, that's where I would argue that if the owner needs that level of accuracy for what they're doing it for, they've defined their use case. So in this situation, Owens Corning needs that accuracy. So if they're able to then provide what standards they scan to or what platform they chose, because they have the prescription of like what they did, they can then share it with others. And if others choose to use it, they know what they're using.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely comes from you. That's a great point. It comes from the owner. You know, it always starts there.
Yeah.
You fall in line. The issue, the only issue can sometimes be that it's actually, there isn't an issue. It has to start with the owner, because if you want the industry to change, it has to start with contractual requirements. So actually, you are I just agree.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing, we've had so many of these discussions, and it was subcontractor and general contractor, and then we were like, wait, what about the owner? Like, the owner's scanning, they're doing all this stuff, they have some of these documentation put together already. How can we help guide them so that all the information can then flow through the rest of the parties in a better way?
Yeah, it's a requirement of the owner, but I think one other thing that we talked about with Owens Corning is, they're getting feedback from their design team on what they need, right? It's getting round tripped back into the specification that they're going to update here in the near term. So it's in the same ways that like a subcontractor may want like more accuracy so that they can do their window install. If the general contractor is already doing some scanning, if they bumped up that accuracy or frequency or coverage even, you could be killing more birds with one stone.
I think that goes back to that piece of delivering what they need at the right level of detail and nothing more. And that gets tricky because, I've a good example, I was just at a conference with Kelly Cohn, and he talked about an owner that they worked with at some point that would not tell them what they wanted to do with the data, and they wanted to dictate what hardware they used and all this different stuff, but wouldn't tell them what they wanted to do with it at the end of the day. And so they used like a mobile scanner or something that was quicker. And then they said they wanted to do all this different stuff with it that would require more accuracy, and that's a misalignment. And I think that there's obviously some education piece with owners, and I think we're starting to see that, but just with the industry at large to understand, like it it shouldn't be a secret for to tell me what you want to do with it, because that's going to help me determine the best course of action. And that there's also a lot of opportunity there, that if I'm doing something with a high accuracy device, that I might actually be able to get something else on top of that. And we sort of put these boundaries on, well, I want to do laser scanning for this, and it's like, well, if I scan this space, I can do a whole bunch of different stuff with it that maybe you didn't realize was possible before. And I really wanted to touch on that. When is geolocation required or not? That's a big one that I think owners also need to understand, and we need to have some education around, in that, especially with owners that have campuses and trying to document their entire campus. Like the answer to that is as soon as possible. And it really is a best practice. It should be looked at as a best practice to have some sort of survey control tied into your laser scans, because that's how you're going to align your data, and coordinates and alignment and all that stuff is it's a fairly complex thing that I think the industry at large has been trying to communicate to folks for a long time. And then you throw in on top of that, we have now we have new data sets, but the common through line is that we've got to have that control, because that aligns everything, even if it's relative control kind of thing, with that existing space. So it gets difficult when you're talking about interior only spaces, and then you start to talk about, well, am I bringing control from the outside and then bringing it in? Is that overkill? Do I need to do that? But what we find is that helps you understand that we all know there's going to be inaccuracies or construction tolerances, and that things aren't going to be in the exact right spot to a certain decimal point. So we want to be able to, where was it going with that? I lost my train of thought. So I was getting at that error over that entire project. Like if you looked at a grid and you look at your existing steel, where is that error? Like did the did the bays creep up a quarter of an inch in that direction, or did they creep up an inch in, in the other direction? How is that error distributed? So the control helps you really align that and know, like, oh, well, because I have control, my grid is aligned, my scan's aligned, and this whole bay over here is actually off. And now you can know that that's the one that's off based on your, in comparison to your documents.
You got
Ryan,
a
did you
On
question,
a
Ryan,
new
here?
I was
Ryan
just
raised his hand. Can we
yeah.
go ahead, Ryan?
My politeness is rewarded. Just a couple of things for thought. I think you're right that the owner has to decide, but I would be careful in making assumptions about what the owner knows. Every owner is different, but in a lot of big corporations, they're not technical experts, and in other corporations they are. But in both cases, they probably struggle to communicate both to their stakeholders and to the people that they hire, especially in a technical aspect like this. So the more you can do to give them kind of multiple choice, to sort of help them understand what they want, I think is useful. The second thing to consider is, again, every owner is different, but most people view owners as a thing. And as an owner, it's not a thing, it's like a nation. And so what you're talking about is a supply chain problem. If I want to build in Colorado, I've got to get my money from Wyoming, and the building's being maintained in Texas. And Wyoming wants to control budget. Colorado wants to like do a great job at construction, and Texas is like, I don't care, I just want things that I don't have to maintain. And so what you end up with are like these, sometimes you get the worst of both worlds, sometimes you get an okay impact, but there's a lot of interaction on the owner side so that you can't exactly do what's best for construction, I guess.
And that's why I love these conversations. And I also have sort of gravitated to this idea of building documentation and where I've gone, because that's the through line in all of this is obviously people, but the next thing is information. And everything that you're talking about there, whether it's, them understanding what the budget is or being able to manage that facility, comes down to, do they have good information? And, design even, whenever we're designing an interior space, I have
not necessarily good, but information that correlates to their need.
Well, I mean, I'm saying quality information,
Yeah.
reliable, so, if you're starting off a design, you can start with the as-built from when it was originally built, but that's gets a lot of people not, in trouble, but in the sense of we're not looking at what the actual space looks like. So that's not quality information. Same thing with the builders. We want, everybody's probably familiar with the Spear doctrine and that whole, stuff where you're talking about the gap between the standard of care and what we actually, need to build. Again, talking about quality of information. And then when you get into managing a facility and the concept of having a digital twin, your database is only as good as the information that you put into it. What you're going to get out of it's only as good as what you put into it. If I don't have my O&Ms and my, fan speeds and, maintenance information, then it's going to be harder than if I had that information, right? So that's where, to me, I go, well, if we did a better job, and, for us, I'm looking at, as we build buildings, to create, the platform for the next project. We work with a lot of repeat clients. We work with a lot of folks that have campuses and they're constantly renovating. And I'm sure Owens Corning is in the same boat. And, they're constantly having to manage these facilities, and the technology on the facilities management hasn't caught up. But if we can document these projects as we go, then I think eventually it doesn't become an extra thing. It just becomes like pulling your camera out and taking a photo. Do we want to address this? Go ahead.
I was going to think, so Josh, those are all. So far, this is an amazing conversation. Only to add to that, Ryan, to everyone on this call, you were talking about a business case, right? You've got Wyoming, you've got Texas, and something's getting built in Colorado. But really what people care about are, is this saving me time? This is accountability, remove profit erosion, and probably after the fact, like, where was my ship built? Where was it? Will I be able to find this? And I think in terms of reality capture, I also wonder, thinking of the business case, like you're trying to just make money, right? It's about making money. It's about building a job so you can go to production. The one thing I've noticed you can do on top of, with time, you can save time, right? Because you can know where things are built. You can hold people, you can hold subcontractors or GCs accountable to say this is not right. And if you do that early enough, they start building the building better as like a high rise goes up or as an industrial plant gets built out. And so there's like a benefit there, right? Because people know they're getting watched. You get what you inspect, not what you expect. The other portion is the benefit of reality capture from a business standpoint is asset depreciation. So normally a building gets built, and when it's done, someone like a large corporation comes in, looks at the drawings, and then says, hey, all of this was installed. We'll start depreciating these assets that have been installed. But if I can know right then that they've been installed and either commissioned, and some things don't even have to be commissioned. Once they've been installed, you can start depreciating that good. That can be like a capital benefit. So the earlier you know that thing has been installed, the better off you are as an owner, because that can affect your capital budget for that year or the following year. Just things to, I'm throwing that out there. But
I think you're right. And look, I'm one data point, but what I see almost has to do with like a behavioral economics type of situation. We all would raise our hand when we say, is there value in reality capture that far outweighs the cost of doing it? Definitely. And when you say, great, now go prove that to the CFO, well, how much do the bids go down if you incorporate reality capture up front? That's going to be a better project. Okay, what does that mean? Does that mean there will be fewer quality issues? Are there loopholes that the contractor is using that they're going to build a bad project if we don't do it? Pretty soon you deteriorate into, well, I don't know, let's just use it. And so what the CFO sees is, well, we're going to spend this money for the convenience of some technical engineer that has this outsized view of like the purity of value delivery, and I'm not really getting money out. And so it's that gap between communicating value and also overcoming the deal where you have certain cost and undefined value. That's the problem. We can go down the road of depreciation and all these little things. I think the greatest value of reality capture is that you can actually communicate with the stakeholders in the project team, and that's hard to put a value on. And I deal with international communication everywhere, and it's really challenging unless you have a picture. And if you can spin around a model and point to something, pretty soon all those people who speak literally a different language, literally have a different technical background, who nod along because some cultures it's impolite to say you don't know, or like there's a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
The value you can get from that is really where reality capture comes in, I think. And
yeah, we've tried to tackle that. Oh, sorry.
Well, my last overall like context point, I gotta jump off here, but I think construction in general doesn't incentivize excellence. What we should be seeing here is we shouldn't have to convince people to do things that are better for the project. Like those people should be delivering so much better that the people who aren't doing it can't compete anymore. And yeah, that's really what we're waiting for, in my opinion.
Hopefully the reality capture, which is the truth behind what's happening, provides a way to moderate that. Mike, I see you've got your hand up. I'm gonna have you jump in here.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. On the savings side, you know, we've done some of our studies internally with the company, and you know, in the past, if I have to send a group of 5 people into Russia, by the time they get there and I pay their T&E and all their time to do the checking and validating of what that plant's condition is, quite honestly, I've paid more money than paying one guy and a couple of guys to go in there and scan it. So there's an immediate savings that we recognize right up front to doing the scanning and really not sending people around the world to essentially take a tape measure and check things. And then on top of that, you know, having it available for all of the engineering resources we use to go at it, we see another savings, and we're seeing it coming out of the financial side of the cost of engineering to do a project. So we are seeing benefits, and we're tracking that. I was trying to comment on the geospatial too. Geospatial for us, I just have to say, you know, from an Owens Corning standpoint, a building to me is there to keep rain off of my equipment. I really don't care about the building. And so when we start thinking that way, geo-referencing to coordinates like that doesn't add a lot of value to us. And 90% of the time, we're scanning an existing facility. And again, the geo doesn't really add anything to us. We do see some value when we're talking about a greenfield and we're going to build a new facility. Yeah, geo coordinates make sense for anybody outside the building. But then when you get inside the building, the problem that you get into is that people are tying their models together. They're using an inventor, they're using a PDMS system, they're using a SolidWorks, and those systems do not like coordinate systems when you start talking about putting a true elevation onto a machine drawing. It just doesn't work out. The systems puke on it. So you immediately are caught into that you've got to go to a relative coordinate system inside the building. And typically everything we do will pick a benchmark within the building. We will call that 000. And that's how everybody designs. That 000 may carry a coordinate that I can actually reference back in the geospace and say, yep, the 000 point of this building is at, you know, X latitude, X longitude, and X elevation. And I can do a correlation, but for the design effort, it doesn't really help us inside the building with the coordinate system. So we have to be a little careful there, primarily because it does kind of throw the design software into a frenzy. And I apologize that I have another meeting. I'm going to have to jump off here, but this has been a really good conversation, and I really like what I'm hearing from everybody. So I appreciate it.
Thanks for all the previous convos and the one today. I think the sticky note that you're looking at is there from Nathan, and if you attended a few of the previous calls, you know, we went a little overboard maybe, and did a whole bunch of different types of reality capture at his home in Denver. And based on his use case, the geolocation is important when they're just simply trying to do some sighting, placement of different things, a sun path analysis, which you can only really do if it knows what its location is in some way. There's various ways of doing it, as Mike alluded to. I mean, you can have a model at 0, 0. That 0, 0 is referencing geospatial coordinate, a global coordinate system. I see it a lot. I will say that what I've been seeing, and I would love to hear what others are seeing. Like all the projects that are starting now seem to be working in real world coordinates for their models that are getting published out to all the stakeholders. So if it's, you know, BIM 360 model or some like that, everyone's going into a Procore, a Revisto, one of those models are being aggregated and published out in a global coordinate system typically. And that helps with other things. I'll just add one thing. The reason I think this is one reason you need to bring in your stakeholders, other stakeholders, because it may be extremely beneficial to some other people in the team that well outweighs someone learning how to accurately reference the coordinates.
Yeah, geolocation is one of those things that you're sort of like, you've got to set your course and you can't easily go back, right? So I was hoping to address Carlos's question as well, where he asked when a trade partner or GC would like to have more detail than the owner wants, which would cost more, should the cost be fully transferred to the owner since more parties have reaping more benefits. And what's interesting to me is that, so my background is in virtual design and construction, and I've been at it for a while, and I've seen it go from the big buzzword thing that only, you know, the top design firms and GCs were getting into, trades as well, to, you know, benefit their own work, be a differentiator, et cetera, and owners not really understand what it is, but switch to or shift to getting educated, starting to write their own requirements, and through that process, getting educated on what they should be asking for, which is stuff like this, right? And I think we're at that same cusp of that wave starting to break with reality capture, where owners are starting to understand what it is. We've been using it for a while in the field for different things. In some cases getting paid for it, in other cases just doing it because it was a lot of benefit to our quality control or whatever. But even though, you know, internally a lot of folks understand the benefits of it, there's still this sort of thing that we talked about earlier, where we were talking about, is it actually reducing costs and things like that? We actually did a case study where we put, I don't know, I think it was $50,000 or $60,000 into scanning on a project for pre-pour elevated deck analysis to understand the penetrations, embeds, all the different stuff that would be in there. And then we calculated based on, because we were seeing a lot of things, this wasn't a self-performed concrete job. We're seeing a lot of issues. And we calculated the return on what was the rework that we prevented, because we found lots of issues. There was one deck that had seven missing embeds, for example. And the rework that we prevented was $270,000, right? So, you know, whatever that is, 6-to-1, you know, ratio. And so the benefit was there, but people poke holes in that and they go, well, who'd you send? Who did you save money? It's like, well, technically the owner, the whole project. So from even our internal perspective, we actually spent money, but we're not valuing in some cases the fact that, you know, we can talk to the owner about saving all this, you know, money. And a lot of this goes back to the concepts that actually, you know, are in that book that Alan had on his desk, that upstream, it's a lot easier to fix these challenges and thinking about them ahead of time. And the construction industry is just rampant with this idea of, you know, the heroic efforts of a few people, an individual putting out a fire. And I want us to stop making fires in the first place. And I think this is, reality capture is a way that we can do that. And we're starting to see owners, swim upstream a little bit and, get into this game. So it's really exciting.
Hey Josh, was that job, did the job finish on time? The reason I ask is shared savings, all of a sudden it's a benefit for everybody. The reason I ask is like, that could be used as a case study, only if that was the case.
I believe so.
So
That'd be a good question. I wish I knew the real
the
answer
reason,
to that, but I believe it did.
I only say that because we did the same thing and we did verification, but we had 3 dormitories that we did prior. And then we had like 600 issues on average on this last dormitory. Then this new one, they were the same thing, same building. And then we went from that to like 60 issues on the first pour to like 12 issues and 5 issues and 3 issues and 0, just by doing verification. And then we finished the job 2 weeks ahead of time. But on top of that, there was contractual. This is where it's like good, to also understand like contractually what was the agreement, because we had shared savings on the job. And if we beat the job early, we got additional savings, right? Additional profit. So it's kind of cool. So when someone's like, well, what do we get out of this? It's like, well, you as a PM met your profit goal. The owner is happy. Everybody gets something out of it. I don't know. Something to throw out there.
Exactly.
Yep.
Josh, and thank you for responding to the question. I think it's very insightful that, we're thinking about not having fires. I just don't think a lot of people are thinking about this. And regardless that the owner sees a lot of the benefits firsthand or not, he'll be affected one way or the other. And I say the benefits economically, because if something goes wrong in the GC, gets delayed, and he'll see maybe not the product he wanted or something he didn't like, or just a sour relationship. So I think that's a very good case.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, we're investing in a predictable result. I talked about as-builting as we go and checking quality as we go. We're starting to build that in, and right now it's these types of things are happening on really, really big jobs, or with owners that are really savvy and that we've done a really good job on like the front end side with VDC. They're starting to see, well, we've just developed an immensely detailed and, spent months and months and months coordinating and developing the plan. And if we start looking at the model as the plan and reality capture as the actual, we can compare that as we go. You could 4D that model and look at, does the current job match the timeline that I'm supposed to be at right now? There's so much different stuff we can do with this if we start thinking about developing that model as the plan and putting as much as we can into that and coordinating that, and then getting into, well, how do we quality control this? If we have all these we have this immense ability to accurately and precisely document the job site at literally any time, and we can compare those. There's no reason we shouldn't be able to understand, where we're at, look at quality, all this kind of stuff. And just like you said, Carlos, we see the same thing where, we'll be on jobs where we're doing that kind of stuff and we're tracking all the different issues, and we go from, having a ton of things happen at each installation to things being put, in place better. They try to throw it in as less precise than they would, or than they could. And then you realize, well, we're checking that. We're going to see, is that, within a couple inches of where it needs to be? Is it within tolerance or not? And all of a sudden the quality gets improved and by a lot. And the trick there is, at least for us, is like, do you want to be Big Brother, or do you want to say, hey, do it right the first time? We're going to check it, but you got to get to the point that it's not policing necessarily. It's trying to drive that quality up.
I think this is what goes back to like all of us are different states is, oh yeah, Dustin, trust but verify. I completely agree. It's like, how can we find a way that it's not like everything doesn't feel like Big Brother. Wouldn't you, as if you were a trade partner or self-performing, wouldn't you want to find out that you did something wrong right when it happened versus right when the project is being turned over? Like, this isn't Big Brother. This is, we're all in this job together. And if we can provide clarity or find the tools that help with that, we're all going to be better off because of it. I mean, yeah, maybe there's the, oh shoot moment where I installed something wrong and I have to fix it, but I'd rather know now than when there's LDs involved.
Right, or you have more trades. So I was just on a call this morning where we were talking about our quality framework, and there was an example where they were showing a room completely framed out, and there's a switch that's in the wrong spot, and it's like, well, while that's framed, you can still move that. It takes 5 minutes, but if you've got that drywall on both sides and finishes and all this kind of stuff, you're going to take multiple days figuring out where everything is and where it needs to go, and cutting holes in drywall and patching and painting and all this other stuff. So exactly what you said, Brianna, it's like, let's figure out that there's a challenge now before we cover everything up. And we've got to build that in, though, right? We don't build that in. And
we have to know what are the tools that we need to do that, and what is the accuracy we need. Dustin, I don't know how you're going to summarize this, this whole conversation. Oh, your audio's off here.
I think we should do a show notes, because I'm only going to be able to loosely really summarize all this. I have a lot of notes here, but there's a lot of really good points. I don't want to get too crazy, but like, there's some amount of, I've been on both sides of it too, and there's like a small mindset or an abundance mindset. And is that person going to use that information against you, or are we in this together to like make a better project? Like a project, I kind of call it a project first approach to when I'm referencing it, but
yeah, maybe we need to celebrate what's successful. I think it seems like we are using these tools to point out the wrong things, but if something's really good, we just really need to go out and tell people like, it's amazing, great. That way maybe people will not feel it's Big Brother.
Yeah, my view is I'm trying to get ahead of it. I want us to adopt it before the owners start saying thou shalt.
Yeah.
I want to influence it and say, well, hey, I've got this and it can help you, so that they don't shove it down my throat later and ask for things that we can't provide.
And also on that, if you do in the middle of the job,
able to have that same leverage. So it's just a thought I'd share. This is a very interesting topic.
It's awesome. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Nathan, I think that's time for us, right?
It is. Yeah, we're back in the main session. Everybody is back.
Okay.
All right. So next up is reality capture. I know Brianna led the discussion along with Dustin. We had Owens Corning and USIBD perspectives talking about really that owner's deliverable requirement when it comes to reality capture. How do we kind of intersect the needs of the owner from a deliverable standpoint with what is sort of the most cost-effective way to deliver that to them? Knowing that we're talking to those that actually provide those laser scanning services or other others in general. So without further ado, Dustin, you want to tell us what you guys covered in the discussion?
Certainly. So, we had a ton of collective knowledge in there, a lot of different perspectives. We're working with CURT, as you mentioned, USIBD, and everyone was really collaboratively speaking about their unique perspectives. So there was a lot of talk about, it was all about owner requirements and how it gets approached, and how there's some standards that people are using to dictate what they want to receive. We talked about using a specification that it tells people what they want out of the project, as opposed to what technology they want used, so that they can get the result they're looking for. There was towards the end, we did talk about the trust and using the data as a tool to advance the project, as opposed to waiting until there's fires on the project and trying to put those fires out and be the hero. So, and there was another big perspective towards the middle of the conversation about not assuming that owners already know what they want out of the process. So this decision making that template that we're working towards is I think something that will be super beneficial from that perspective of educating. If you want this result, you know, these are the types of things that you need to expect, and that being, you know, the price and interoperability and all those ROIs.
Yeah,
I would totally recommend.
I was gonna say, yeah. What is the right level of understanding that an owner needs to have in order to make a good decision, right? Because they don't need to be an expert, obviously. That's why they're the owner, but they need to know enough to be dangerous.
Yeah, it's just like what we saw with BIM, 10 years ago, where they're asking for BIM, but they're not getting specific about LOD, or, making up stuff that aren't really standards. And I think we're in a better spot to understand those trends and where that heads. And in the past, that's headed toward owners writing their own requirements and asking for the world, and sort of pulling back a little bit when they start to get a better understanding. And we're seeing that happen right now with the reality capture, where different jurisdictions are creating their own reality capture requirements. So now's the time to come together and really understand where the use cases are and what the benefits are and who gains that benefit.
I just thought of this, Josh. We're gonna have to create a t-shirt for the group that's LOA is the new LOD.